Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to explore one of the most fascinating and vital ecosystems on our planet, corals and coral reefs. Imagine a bustling, vibrant underwater city made entirely of stone, but built by millions of tiny, soft-bodied creatures, no bigger than a pencil eraser. These tiny creatures are the master architects of the ocean. By the end of this lecture, you will understand not only the biology of these incredible animals, but also the mathematics behind how they construct massive geological structures over thousands of years. Let us dive in. To begin our journey, we must first understand what a coral actually is. While they might look like colorful rocks or plants, corals are actually marine invertebrates belonging to the phylum Cynaria and the class Anthozoa. A single coral animal is called a polyp. Think of a polyp as a tiny, soft-bodied builder. Just like humans build brick houses to protect themselves, these polyps extract minerals from the seawater to secrete hard, protective limestone cups around their soft bodies. When millions of these polyps live side by side, their tiny limestone houses fuse together, creating massive underwater structures that can even be seen from space. Now that we know what a polyp is, let us look at how they survive. Most reef-building corals share a crucial, mutually beneficial relationship with microscopic algae called zooxanthellae. These algae actually live inside the tissues of the coral. It is a perfect partnership. The coral provides the algae with a safe, protected environment and the necessary compounds for photosynthesis. In return, the algae act as an internal food factory, producing oxygen and supplying the coral with glucose, glycerol, and amino acids. This incredible symbiotic relationship provides the coral with up to 90% of its energy needs, which is exactly why these corals require clear, shallow, and sunlit waters to thrive. Before we move on to the mathematics of coral growth, let us visualize the anatomy we just discussed. Here you are looking at a cross-section of a single coral polyp. Notice the tentacles at the top. These surround the mouth and are used to catch microscopic food from the water, which is then digested in the central stomach cavity. Look closely at the inner tissues, and you will see tiny green dots representing the zooxanthellae algae living right inside the coral. Finally, at the very bottom, you can see the hard corallite base. This is the limestone skeleton the polyp secretes, anchoring it in place and slowly building the reef upward. Understanding their biology helps us appreciate their immense ecological value. Corals are incredibly important because they form the foundational structure of coral reefs, often referred to as the rainforests of the sea. It is staggering to think that even though coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, they support an estimated 25% of all marine life. They provide essential habitats, shelter, and breeding grounds for thousands of species. For humans, they are equally vital. They act as massive natural breakwaters, absorbing wave energy and protecting coastal communities from devastating storms and floods, while also supporting local economies and medical research. Now that we understand what corals are and why they matter, let us look at how they grow. To track a coral colony over time, marine biologists use a simple linear growth model. The formula is h of t equals h naught plus g times t. Let us break down these symbols. H of t represents the total height of the coral colony at a future time, measured in centimeters. H naught is the initial height, when we first start observing it. G is the annual growth rate, meaning how much calcium carbonate skeleton it adds each year. Finally, T is the elapsed time in years. Conceptually, the future size is just the starting size plus the accumulated new growth. If the growth rate G increases due to optimal sunlight, the final height will increase much faster. Let us see this formula in action with a concrete example. A marine biologist is studying a young branching coral colony that is currently 15 centimeters tall. It grows at a steady rate of 2.5 centimeters per year. We want to calculate its expected height after 8 years. First, we identify our given values. Initial height is 15, growth rate is 2.5, and time is 8. We substitute these into our linear growth equation. Next, we multiply the annual growth rate by the 8 years, which tells us the coral will add exactly 20 centimeters of new skeleton. Finally, we add this new growth to the original 15 centimeters. Our final answer is 35 centimeters. Physically, this means after 8 years, the colony will stand 35 centimeters tall, providing a much larger habitat for marine life. This formula we just used can also help us solve for time, which is crucial for conservation. Imagine a team planting a small coral fragment that is 5 centimeters tall. They needed to reach a target height of 50 centimeters to restore a damaged reef. The growth rate is 1.5 centimeters per year. How long will this take? We set our equation with 50 on the left side. On the right, we have 5 plus 1.5 times our unknown time, t. To isolate the new growth needed, we subtract 5 from 50, leaving 45 centimeters of required growth. Finally, we divide that 45 by the annual rate of 1.5. The result is 30 years. This shows us that reef restoration is a very slow process, requiring decades of patience and strict environmental protection. Now that we have calculated how individual colonies grow, let us zoom out to the macro scale. If a single coral polyp is like a single bricklayer, then a coral reef is the massive, sprawling metropolis they build together over thousands of years. It begins when coral larvae drift through the water and settle on the submerged, rocky edges of a volcanic island. As generations of corals live, build their hard skeletons, and eventually die, they leave behind thick layers of solid limestone. New corals then grow directly on top of the old ones, slowly building massive underwater walls. Over millennia, these structures become so large that they actually change the way ocean currents flow, creating calm, protected lagoons. This continuous upward growth leads us to an elegant geological concept, Charles Darwin's theory of subsidence. Darwin brilliantly explained that there are 3 main types of coral reefs, representing different stages of evolution. First is the fringing reef, which grows directly from the shoreline of a newly formed island. Second is the barrier reef. As the heavy volcanic island slowly sinks or subsides into the ocean crust, the corals keep growing upward to stay in the sunlight, creating a deep, wide lagoon between the reef and the shore. Finally, we have the atoll. This occurs when the original island has completely sunk beneath the ocean surface, leaving only an upward-growing circular ring of coral behind. Let us visualize Darwin's theory with this diagram. On the far left, you see the first stage, a fringing reef. Notice how the coral grows directly attached to the shallow edges of the tall volcanic island. Moving to the middle panel, the barrier reef, look at the downward arrow labeled subsidence. The Evie Island is sinking, but the corals are growing upward to survive, creating that distinct lagoon in between. Finally, on the right, we see the atoll stage. The original volcanic island is now completely submerged, hidden deep underwater. All that remains at the surface is the living, upward-growing ring of coral surrounding a central lagoon. It is a beautiful demonstration of biology keeping pace with geology. To truly understand the massive scale of this reef building, we need to measure it mathematically. Scientists calculate the volume of calcium carbonate deposited by a reef over time using this formula. V equals A times R times T. Let us define these terms. V represents the total volume of limestone rock created, measured in cubic meters. A stands for the active surface area of the living coral reef in square meters. R is the vertical accretion rate, which is simply how fast the reef grows upward in meters per year. And T is the time period in years. Conceptually, the total volume of rock is just the area multiplied by the upward growth rate accumulated over time. Even a tiny growth rate R, when multiplied by a massive area A, results in an enormous volume. Before we move on, let us see this volume formula with a concrete example. A small fringing reef has an active growing area of 10,000 square meters. Its vertical accretion rate is 0.005 meters per year. We want to calculate the total volume of solid limestone deposited over 200 years. We start by substituting our known values into the equation. Area is 10,000, rate is 0.005, and time is 200. First, we multiply the area by the growth rate. This tells us the reef produces 50 cubic meters of solid rock every single year. Finally, we multiply that annual production by 200 years. The final answer is 10,000 cubic meters. This perfectly demonstrates the incredible hidden power of these tiny organisms as geological builders. This same volume formula can be rearranged to reveal the deep history of our oceans. Geologists are studying an ancient atoll with a total limestone volume of 5 million cubic meters. The surface area is 250,000 square meters, and the accretion rate is 0.004 meters per year. How long did it take to form? We plug our massive volume into the left side of the equation. On the right, we multiply the area by the growth rate, leaving time t as our unknown. Multiplying the area by the rate shows the atoll adds exactly 1,000 cubic meters of rock annually. To find the age, we divide the total volume of 5 million by that annual production of 1,000. The result is 5,000 years of continuous, uninterrupted coral growth. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. Let us review the key takeaways. First, we learned that corals are tiny marine invertebrates that build massive structures, relying heavily on a symbiotic relationship with photosynthetic algae for their energy. Second, we saw how simple linear mathematical models allow us to predict the growth of individual colonies and plan critical restoration efforts. Third, we explored Darwin's theory of subsidence, understanding how reefs evolve from fringing reefs to barrier reefs and finally into isolated atolls. Lastly, we calculated the sheer volume of rock they produce, proving that corals are not just biological habitats, but major geological forces shaping our Earth. You now have a solid foundation in the biology and mathematics of coral reefs. Excellent work today.